for exam 2. Alright, number 1, we're finding the domain of a circle. So we have to get the center from the equation. Alright, so we know it's h comma k, so that would be 4 comma negative 2, right? It's the number that's being subtracted. So here would be 4, and this would be negative 2 subtracted, right? Okay, so that's the center, and then the radius is 4. So you don't necessarily have to draw the circle, but I prefer to draw the circle, but basically remember that x domain is all of your x values of your function. And so what you could do is you could add 4, since it's the circle is 1, 2, 3, 4 right here, right? So if you extend 4 to the left, the right, up and down, we would have our circle. So you could draw it if you prefer to draw it. 1, 2, 3, 4. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so that's your circle, and then from there you can get the domain and the range. Domain by looking at the x values, range by looking at the y, right? Or what you could do is you could also add 4. This is your x value, right? That's your y, your ordered pair. So you can add 4. 4 plus 4 is 8, right? So that's going to be the outer range of your domain. And 4 minus 4, in other words, this left point is 0. So that would be 0, bracket 0 to 8, right? Because those are points on the circle. All right, we know that range are all the y values, right? So what you can do is add 4 to the y value and subtract 4, and that will give you the lowest point and the highest point of your y values on the circle, okay? So that would be negative 2 minus 4 is negative 6. Remember, always smallest number on the left. And then add them, negative 2 plus 4 is 2, right? So basically that's from down here to up here. So whether you want to draw the circle or just use a definition of domain and range to find it is totally fine, but that is our answer. All right, the second one, it's asking if y is a function of x, right? Can you represent y as a function of x? Okay, that means that we need to isolate y. Of course, this could be any equation, right? But what we need to know here is we need to express y in terms of x. So I'm trying to get y alone, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and subtract 6x over here, subtract 6x, and that way I can start getting my y alone. Here I don't have to put this in the right order since I see that it's a quadratic function, just because it's better to put things in standard form, I'm going to put it into ax squared plus bx plus c, okay? But you don't need to do that, but it's always nice to do that. Okay, now here, I'm still trying to get my y alone. Y is squared and multiplied by 4. So the opposite of multiplying by 4 is dividing by 4. Okay? So I'm going to divide every term by 4 in order to get y squared alone. Okay? So now I get y squared equals, and you could simplify this, it would be negative 2x squared minus 3 over 2x plus 1 over 4. And last but not least, the opposite of squaring is square rooting to get my y alone. So I'm going to square root both sides. And remember, when you get the square root, it's a plus or minus answer, right? So basically what this is telling me, I'm going to erase this. Now this is just y, right? So basically what this is telling me is when you plug in any x value, complete the operations, square root it, and then you're going to have one positive number answer and one negative answer. And so therefore you're going to have two, for every input x, you have 2 outputs for y, right? So therefore it is not a function. Remember, to be a function, you need to have one y value, only one y value for every x, right? You shouldn't be plugging in something and getting 2 or more y values coming out. All right, if you have a graph, you can check if it's a function by using the vertical line test. Make sure that there's only one point on every vertical line. In other words, every x value only has one y value corresponding to it. Well, no, never mind. Let me erase that. Okay, so that was simple. Okay, 3a and 3b you get from looking at the graph. So just look at the y value when you plug in -2, that's 2. And when you plug in 2, that is the y value of 6. All right, for 3b, they give you a function and you have to plug in certain values, right? So just make sure that you do order of operations correctly, right? So remember, when you plug in, you want to plug in with parentheses, right? So I'm plugging in -2 into every x. And then just solve. Right, so this is -2 to the second power. So -2 times -2 is 4. Oops. -4 times 4 is -16, and then add 2. All right, so this is going to be -14. And same thing for the bottom, because 2 squared is again 4. 4 times -4 is -16, add 2, and so of course there's symmetry because this is a quadratic function, so this makes sense. Okay, but you're going to plug in any value. All right, so now we have another function. It's a quadratic function again, and we're going to find f of x plus h. So that's your input. So every time you see an x, you're going to replace it with x plus h with parentheses. Why with parentheses? Because you need to be careful with your signs. You have to see if you need to distribute or FOIL it out, whatever is needed. All right, so here I can clearly see I need to raise x plus 2 to the second power. So that means I need to multiply 2 terms by 2 terms, and the best way to do that is using FOIL to make sure you distribute all the terms correctly, right? So here we have first, outer, they're multiplied, right? Inner, and last. Of course, you're gonna have like terms in the middle unless they cancel out, but join them if possible, right? So remember that x times h is the same as h times x. So these are the same like terms. So I'm gonna write that as 2xh. Okay, perfect. Okay, but there's a negative out here. You can have a negative number as well. So don't forget to distribute that negative once you get your answer after you FOILed. Okay, that's gonna be, I'll do it over here. It's gonna be -x squared minus 2xh minus h squared. Okay, and then of course don't forget about the rest. So this 7 says multiply me. It wants to be multiplied by the x and by the h. And of course the 5 is just a 5. I couldn't plug anything into there, so that number is going to remain. Okay, I'm going to double check to make sure that I don't have any like terms to put together. I don't, so this is my final answer for f of x plus h. All right, now that's important. I need to get the first part correct because the second part, it says finish it and get the difference quotient. All right, so the difference quotient formula is given to you, but here it is. All right, so I need to use what I got in part A. And I need to subtract f of x from it, right? So subtract f of x. Well, f of x is -x squared plus 7x plus 5. Right, so I need to subtract all these terms, which of course is going to change their sign. So subtracting -x squared is adding x squared, subtracting 7x, and subtracting 5, okay? And it's going to be all over h. Okay, so now terms should cancel out, right? right? So I'm gonna see which terms cancel. Okay, and the cool thing is that all these terms that are left over have an h, and I'm going to be dividing by h. Alright, so that means that one h cancels from each term. So you could pull the h out, or you can just cancel. I'm gonna go ahead and pull the h out. So if I pull out the h, it's gonna be leaving with negative 2x minus 1h plus 7, right? This is like taking out a GCF of h. And then since there's an h on the bottom, these h's will cancel, and I will have my final answer right here. Okay. Alright, next one is identifying even and odd. Even, odd, or neither functions. Right, so if you need to go back to the notes, you go back to the notes. It's all been posted for you. Okay, so part A, this is 5A. Okay, so I know that in order to check if it's even or odd, I have to plug in f of negative x. Okay, this is basically saying, okay, this is a quadratic function, right? But whatever function this is, okay, f of x would be, this would be positive values over here, right? So now we're checking negative values over here, and we're seeing if there's symmetry, okay? If there's symmetry on the y-axis, that means it's even. Okay, so if I get f of x back, when I plug in f of negative x, that means there is symmetry, the same symmetry, reflected on the y, right? And on the other hand, if it's odd, when I plug in f of negative x, I'll get negative f of x. Okay, so that means there's symmetry on the x and the y axis. So if it started off here, what you would get is you would have something that flipped on the x and flipped on the y, right? So that is an odd function. This looks like the cubic function, which is odd, right? Okay, so let's go ahead and plug in f of negative x into every x. I'm sorry, let's plug in negative x into every x. Right, and then simplify. So negative x squared, since you are multiplying a negative an even amount of times, that would be positive. So that's just going to be x squared with the 4 in front. This right here, a negative times a negative is a positive. And so now I have my answer. So now I have to go back and say, okay, was there symmetry on the x, or is there symmetry on the x and the y, or is there no symmetry at all, right? Which is going back to the definition. So let's take a look. Is this f of x? Well, f of x, it's not the same because this one's negative and what I got was positive. Okay, so I didn't get f of x, so it's not even. Is it odd? And so for odd, what you do is you take out a negative if possible, which is always possible. Remember, a positive has 2 negatives in it. So if I take out a negative, I need to say what is left behind, because these are supposed to be equivalent, right? So if I take out a negative, that means that now all these terms are the opposite sign in order to be equivalent. And now I take a look in here, okay, is this f of x? Because if it is f of x, then it'd be negative f of x, which is odd. But I take a look at f of x and I'm like, okay, nope, well, they all don't match. So this is neither even nor odd, it is neither. Right, and then we're going to go ahead and plug in negative x and see what's happening to the function on the other side of the function. Okay, so here I'm getting negative 2x on top, and over here, same thing, negative x to the second power is just x squared. Okay, so here I take a look and I say, okay, is this the original function f of x? Nope, but I see that it's the opposite sign of it, right? There's a negative that I can pull out here, and then what is left over when you take out the negative from top? The original function. So this is negative f of x, so this means that it is an odd function. Alright, last one on the practice test, f of x for even and odd. Right, same thing, I'm gonna go ahead and plug in negative x. Alright, I'll start over here because it's raised to the 8th power in parentheses. So again, I'm raising a negative to an even, I'm multiplying a negative an even amount of times, so that's gonna be positive x to the 8th. Everything else stays the same, and here's another case of an odd function because this x times the square root of 5 minus x to the 8th is f of x, right? But there's a negative in front, so that means that it satisfies the definition of odd. Okay. Alright, now it's time for domain. Your favorite. F of x equals the square root of 4 minus 10 to the x. Alright, so for here, you have to take a look, right? Because you can have a function with the square root in the numerator, or square root in the denominator, a denominator, right? So we take a look here and we're like, okay, is there any limitation as to what I can plug in for x? Well, yes, because I don't want there to be imaginary numbers, right? I don't want this number 4 minus 10x to be negative, right? For example, negative 5, right? Because that is imaginary, and I'm in the real number world, right? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna make sure that that this number is positive, right? So 4 minus 10x, remember that's some number, is positive. So it's either equal to 0 or it's greater than 0. And from there you just solve using the rules of inequalities, right? So minus 4, negative 10x is greater or equal to negative 4. Okay, what's the opposite of multiplying x by negative 10? Dividing by negative 10. But remember, when you multiply or divide by a negative, when you have inequalities, you need to flip the sign, right? So it's going to be just x on the left is now going to be a less than or equal to, and then of course this you can simplify, right? A negative divided by a negative is a positive, and 4/10 is the same as 2/5, right? When you simplify. And divide by 2 on top and bottom. Right, so now I have to write this in interval notation. So this is saying if you need to write, draw it on the number line to help you out, then you totally can, right? So this is saying that for my x values, I can either pick values less than 2/5, which is on the left, or 2/5, which is a closed circle, right? So how to write this in interval notation? Well, it's going to be negative infinity, all the negative numbers, all the way to 2/5 with the bracket, because you can pick 2/5. 2/5 in here would make it 0, which is fine, but I don't want anything greater than 2/5 because then I would be getting negative numbers in the square root, which is imaginary. Alright, I'm going to skip to part C for now. I'm going to do all the ones that are just domain. Alright, so for here I have to take a look and I'm like, okay, is there anything that, first of all, I need to subtract these fractions. But I know in order to subtract or add fractions, I need to have the same denominator. Okay, remember that this is some number and this is another number. So I know if I multiply these numbers, then that will be my new common denominator, right? I don't actually have to solve the whole thing. I just have to think about the denominator. Because remember that I don't have square roots, so I'm not worried about square roots. And at the same time, remember, we don't want zeros in the denominator because that would give us an error, right? That would be undefined. So we're trying to make sure that the x values that we plug in here won't give us a 0. All right, so we're gonna do that separately. So we're gonna make sure that x squared plus 16 doesn't give me 0. and that x squared minus 4 doesn't equal 0. Now, I know some of you guys like to just plug in your head and say, oh yeah, 2 squared is 4, 4 minus 4 is 0, so not 2. But don't forget that there are 2 answers. Remember, it's x to the second power, so most of the time you're gonna get 2 answers, right? 2 roots. So you should use the square root property. So add 4, x squared doesn't equal 4, right? And then we square root both sides, keeping in mind you're doing positive and negative answers. All right, remember 2 times 2 is 4, and negative 2 times negative 2 is 4 as well. So this means that x can't equal 2 or negative 2. Okay. Now on this side, when I go ahead and subtract using the square root property, I get that x squared can't equal negative 16, right? And when I square root both sides, keep in mind it's a plus or minus answer, the square root of negative 16 is imaginary, right? It would be 4i, plus or minus 4i. But we're not going to be plugging in imaginary numbers if this is a real numbers world, right? So I don't have to include that. But let's say it was 3 and negative 3, then that means I have 4 values that I don't want to plug in, right? That would be 3, negative 3, 2, and negative 2. And in that case, you definitely want to put it on a number line in order to visualize this so that you can write it in interval notation, right? So this is saying x could be any value, just don't pick 2 or negative 2 because that would give us 0 on this side, which would make the entire thing 0. The entire denominator 0, and that'd be undefined, right? So basically here, I'm gonna put negative 2 and 2, and I'm gonna make sure that the x values that I pick are anything but those values, right? So now that helps guide me. So it's all the negative numbers all the way to negative 2. It's the numbers in between negative 2 and 2, just don't pick them, that's why I use parentheses. And then union 2 all the way to infinity. Any positive number greater than 2 works as well. So erase this. Alright, so here we have our domain and interval notation. Remember, you need to write it in interval notation. Alrighty? Alright, next one, part D. Alright, so you gotta look at the denominator again, okay? I don't have square roots, because then I would definitely want to keep in mind that I want positive numbers in there. So here there's 2 parts to it, right? Because I have a fraction within the denominator. So if I just look at the fraction, 8 over x plus 2, I know that I don't want the denominator to be equal to 0, right? So that'd be x plus 2 doesn't equal 0, or can't equal 0, right? When you solve, you get that x can't equal negative 2, okay? Great, so that's part of it. But at the same time, I also don't want the entire denominator to give me 0. And then from there, you should know how to solve that, right? So add 2, add 2. This is saying that 8 over x plus 2 shouldn't equal 2, all right? How do we solve this? Let me put it more over here to have more space. Okay, so remember that when you have a denominator with your variable, you need that variable, right? So I don't know what x plus 2 is, but it's some number. But if I multiply by that same number, then I have the same on top and bottom, and they will cancel, right? But whatever you do to one side, you do to the other. So now this is saying that 8 doesn't equal 2. And then this 2 wants to be distributed. Okay, so what did I do? I added 2, now I have my fraction unknown on the left. How do I get rid of the denominator? By multiplying by the denominator. What you do to one side, you do to the other. So now we get that 8 can't equal, and then distribute that 2. So that'll be 2x plus 4. Okay, and you guys know how to do basic algebra, so you just keep solving. Minus 4, run out of space. So this is 4 can't equal 2x, so clearly x can't equal 2, right? When you divide both sides by 2. So another case of not wanting 2 or negative 2, so just like the previous one, it would be negative infinity to negative 2, the numbers in between them, and then 2 until infinity. Okay, and again, you could draw the number line if it helps you, especially if you're confused. All right, so 2 parts to this question. First, we don't want the little fraction to have an error, and we don't want the entire fraction, which is a function, to give an error with 0 in the denominator. All right, okay, part E. Part E is interesting because we have a square root, so you have to keep in mind we want positive numbers, but at the same time it's in the denominator, right? So we want this to not equal 0, right? And at the same time we want positive values, right? So what are we gonna do? So we're gonna make sure that the inside number, this is some number, right? So this number, x minus 12, I want it to be greater than 0, right? Usually it's greater or equal to 0 because I'm okay with zeros and I'm okay with positive numbers in a square root, right? That wouldn't give me imaginary. But here, because it's in the denominator, I don't want 0, so I'm not going to include the equals part. I'm just going to make sure that it's a positive number. So therefore, just make sure that it's greater than 0, whatever that number in the square root is. And then from there, you just solve, and you get x has to be greater than 12 in order for this to be positive. Okay, and how do you write that interval notation? If you want to draw it on the number line, you can. That would be open circle at 12 and everything greater than 12. So that would be start at 12, but don't pick it, put a parentheses, and go all the way to infinity. Any positive number greater than that is fine. Okay, back to part B. This is number 6, part B. So we have a graph. We have a part of a parabola graphed for us, and we have to answer some questions about it, right? So first of all, it says, what is the function's domain? So in other words, what are the x values of the function? Well, if you look at the ordered pair all the way on the left, that ordered pair is -4, 7, right? And you look at the ordered pair, that's the open circle. And if you look at this ordered pair, that's 0, -9, right? So if I'm looking at all the x values, I see that the lowest x value is -4, right? That's -4, but with the parentheses because that's an open circle, so it's just more of a reference point. So when you plug in -4, you get 7, but it's an open circle. So make sure you have a parentheses at -4, and then for the x values, it's going all the way to 0, right? And that is a bracket because that is a closed circle on the parabola on the function. Okay, for part B, that's the range. The range are the y values. So it looks like the lowest y value is -9, right? And that's a closed circle. And then the greatest y value is the 7. And that is an open circle because that's not necessarily part of a function, more of a reference point. Okay, so part C is any x-intercepts. So x-intercepts are points that touch the x-axis. So we see that at -3, 0, you have an x-intercept, and for the y-intercept, it's 0, -9. Okay, so you have to write it as ordered pairs. All right, this is on the y-axis. If it's y-intercept, it's on the y-axis. If it's x-intercept, it's any points on the x-axis. Okay, moving on to number 7. All right, so 7, here's your function. And we want to plug in certain values, okay? Piece of cake. So we're gonna plug in 5 for f. For part A, we're gonna plug in 5 into the function, right? So I'm gonna go ahead and plug in 5 into every x and just solve, right? So 5 squared is 25. 25 times 4 is 100. Okay, so 100 minus 1 on top, and 5 squared on the bottom is 25. All right, so it's gonna be 99 over 25, and you can leave it like that. If you wanna turn it into a decimal, you can do that as well. All right, now for part B, you're gonna plug in -5 into the function. All right, so similar to before, getting the same answer, right? Because this number is going to be positive. Even though it's negative, when you square it, it'll be positive. So this is still 25 times 4, which is 100, minus 1 is 99. And on the bottom, that's still 25. So, kind of like the earlier problem. Because this is both of them are x's squared, it doesn't matter if you plug in a negative or positive value, you're going to be getting the same answer if you plugged in the same number, just opposite sides. Right, and last but not least, f of -x, which is what you do to see if it's even or odd, right? I'm going to plug in -x into every x and see what I get. So this is negative x squared, which is x squared. And negative x squared is again x squared. So now I look at it and I'm like, oh wow, look at that, that's nice. So when I plugged in f of negative x, I'm getting my original function back, right? That is the definition of an even function. Okay. Okay, great. So now we have some multiple choice questions about shifts. Okay, so we have a parent function and it's shifted up, down, left, right, stretched, or shrunk. Okay, so here we have f of x equals x minus 4 cubed plus 4. Okay, so it tells you that the standard function or the parent function is x to the third power. Now, this is one of the parent functions that I told you guys to know. Alright, so this is what the cubic function looks like. Okay, so it starts here, passes the origin, and what this is saying is that it's going 4 to the right, and it's shifted 4 units up. Right, so from here, from the origin, I'll go 4 to the right, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 4 up, 1, 2, 3, 4. So this is the new point. The point where the
Buick is at church.
function changes.
Take a look at it.
Changes direction, right? So here's going up to this point, and now it's going from the left is going up, and then it's continuing to go, right? So if you know what the cubic function looks like, then you'll be able to shift it however you want. Oh, but that's not what it's asking itself. It's just telling us A, B, C, or D. So this was moved, okay, to the right is horizontal, right? So it was moved horizontally 4 units to the right. So now it's either A or C. And then it's saying that it's vertically shifted either 4 up or 4 down. We said it was 4 up, so that is letter C. Okay? So you didn't have to draw it, but if you did, you would just grab the parent function of the cubic function, shift it 4 up, 4 to the right, and you're going to have your cubic function.
Do like a 3D in terms of like order car.
Okay, so that's part A. Okay, 9 says the parent function, not 9.
No.
The second question in A, the parent function is the square root of x, right? You should know what that looks like. And it's saying that now we have a new function, h of x. Okay, so here I can see, oh hey, I could pull a negative out because there's a negative in front of x. So if I pull a negative out, I'm left with x plus 6. Alrighty, so what does this mean? This means that there's a reflection on the y-axis, right? If the negative is outside of the square root, it would be a reflection on the x-axis. If it's inside the square root or the parentheses, it would be reflected on the y-axis. Okay, and at the same time, I see that it's shifted 6 units to the left. All right, so let's see which one that would be. Horizontally shifted to the left by 6 units, that's correct. So it's either A or B. And then it's reflected about the y-axis, so that is letter B. Awesome. If you wanted to shift it, you would shift it on the y-axis. Let me fix that. So it would be over here, and then 6 units to the left, grab the point at the origin and move it 6 to the left. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So it'd be over here. So that's where the new function would be if you had to graph it. Now it's in the 4th quadrant. Okay, next one, cubic function f of x equals x squared. The parabola at the origin, and it's 1/2 in front, and minus 3 inside. So what's being done to it? So it's shifting 3 to the right, and then the 1/2, if you think about it, a 1/2, when you multiply a number by a half is making it smaller, right, by a half. So this is shrinking. And remember, if it's between 0 to 1 and you're multiplying by a fraction, you are shrinking your function, right? If this number was greater than 1, 2, 3, 4, 1.5, right, then that means you're going to be increasing your values by that much, by a factor of that much. So that would be enlarging it or stretching it. Alright, so let's see which one of these it would be. Horizontal shift 3 to the right, so that's either B or D. And then it shrunk vertically by a half. So that's B. Okay, if I had to draw this, what would I do? I would shift it 3 to the right. 1, 2, 3. Now it's here. Okay. And now shrinking by a half. So of course shrinking, that would be vertical. And it would be smaller, right? It would be shrinking. If it was enlarging, of course it would make it larger on the outside. So it would be up here. Okay, so that's that. Okay, now how fun. We're moving on to number 9, which is graphing the function. All right, so remember for these type of questions, you can make your chart and pick X and Y values, okay? So it's saying it's 0 if X is less than -4, so such as -5, -6, your Y value is always 0. As you can see, there's nothing you can plug in. This is number 9, piecewise functions. Again, if you need to look at the notes, you can. I believe it's notes 20. Okay, then the next part says it's negative, f of x is -3x if it's in between -4 and 0. So I'm gonna put -4 in here. I'm gonna put in 0, and let's pick some values in between -4 and 0. So maybe -2 and -1. Okay, that's for my second function. Let's put this on. And for my third function, any value greater than or equal to 0. So I'll plug in 0, maybe 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so that'd be for my third function. Okay, so here, for the middle function, when I plug in -4, you're gonna be multiplying by -3. So -4 times -3 is 12, -2 times -3 is 6, -1 times -3 is 3, and of course 0 times anything is 0. But keep in mind that this 0 that I plugged in is an open circle, right? Because when you look at the second function, -3x is in between -4 with the bracket at -4 and open circle at 0, right? Okay, for the third function, x is 0, so that would be a closed circle, or anything greater than 0. So now let's plug in and square whatever comes in. So 0 squared is 0, but that's closed now. 1 squared is 1, 2 squared is 4, 3 squared is 9, okay? So now let's graph this, and then we'll pick A, B, C, or D. Okay, so let's graph the first part. The first part is saying -5, -6, -5, which is right here, -6. Okay, so this is 0, and this is gonna be 0 forever on the left, right? All the way to -infinity. Okay, it's 0 if it's less than. Okay. Now, -4, if you were to plug in -4, you would still get 0, right? But at -4 would be an open circle because it's not supposed to include -4. It's more of a reference point to see, hey, start over here and pick anything less than it. So that has to be an open circle at -4 and everything shaded to the left, okay? So that's looking good. Now the second part, let's find these points. -4, 12. Right here. -2, 6. -1, 3. And 0, 0 with an open circle, right? So that means over here, I have a negative slope line. Okay, that makes sense. It's a negative slope. So over here, as you can see, there's a hole. So this is the actual value of f of -4. Okay, and then last but not least, now looking at the third function, now it says 0, 0 is closed. So now I can close it because the third function starts there. And then 1, 1, 2, 4, and 3, 9. That's gonna be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That's weird. Three, 9. Okay, so I know that that's a parabola, so it's gonna look like a U shape on the right hand side. Okay, so that's what it would look like. here it's a straight line, open circle on -4 all the way to the left, and there's a negative slope line right here, and then from there it'll be the half of the parabola. Okay, so which one would that be? That's letter C. Alright, let's go on to number 10, sketch the graph. Alright, so it's f of x equals absolute value of x minus 2 plus 3. Okay, so I know that this is the parent function of the absolute value of x. If you don't know what that looks like, you can always make a chart, plug in x values, and see what comes out for y and graph it that way. Okay, but another thing you should know is that the absolute value of x is a v at 0. It's shifted 2 to the right and 3 units up. Okay, so from the origin it's going to be shifted 2 to the right, 1, 2, 3 up, 1, 2, 3. So this is the point. Okay, so now your v is going to be over here. Now technically, to make it look nice, you do want to plug in some values on the left and the right just to make sure that your v is perfect. So I can see that when I shifted from the origin, I went 2 to the right and 3 up. So that point is 2, 3. Okay, so I can plug in a value to the left of 2, which is 1, and to the right of 2, which is 3, just to see what the v looks on both sides. Okay, so if I were to plug in 1 into here, it'd be the absolute value of 1 minus 2 plus 3. Well, 1 minus 2 is -1. The absolute value of -1 is 1, and 1 plus 3 is 4. Okay. And on the other side, if I were to plug in 3 into the function, just to get the right side of the v, 3 minus 2 is 1, absolute value of 1 is 1, and 1 plus 3 is 4, right? So that's nice. That was expected to have symmetry, right? So let's just make sure that this is good. So 1, 4 is this point, and 3, 4 is this point. So yeah, my v does look good. Right, for number 11, you're going to graph a piecewise function. It's not multiple choice this time. So we're going to create another chart. Okay, so let's create a chart. For we're going to plug in -1, but we know that that's going to be an open circle because that's more of a reference point. That's not actually part of the function. It would have to have the equal sign to be part of it, but it's going to be any value less than -1. So let's plug in -2, -3. That's for the first function. For the second function, I'm going to plug in -1, and it's a closed circle because that is part of the function. And you're going to plug in values greater than -1, so that would be 0, 1, 2. Right? So now just plug in. So for this part, the top part, the function is 3 times x. So multiply by 3. So for the bottom function, it's a parabola, x squared. So it's going to be -1 squared is 1, 0 squared, 1 squared, 2 squared. Okay, so now I can graph it. I have all my points. So this is -1, -3, open circle. Then -2, -6, closed circle. -3, -9, I ran out of space. 1, 2, 3 would be down here. Okay, so that's would be actually like right here, but I ran out of space. So this would be a negative slope line. Okay, then let's see -1, 1, -1, 1. That's a closed circle. 0, 0. 1, 1, and 2, 4. Okay, so that's the part of the parabola that I'm allowed to have. Okay, so as you can see here, there's a hole right here, and there's an actual point here. So if I were to ask you what is f of -1, it's not the open circle, it would be the y value of the closed circle. So that would be 1. Okay, so that's your piecewise function. All right. Moving on to number 12. Almost done with the test, the practice test. Right, number 12 is telling you it's graphed for you, and it's saying find g of f of 5. Okay, so rewrite this. This is g of f of 5. So find f of 5 and then plug it into g. So if you look at the function, the v function on top, the y value corresponding to 5 is 8, right? 5 comma 8 is a point. So f of 5 is 8. And now look at 8 on the g function. The ordered pair is 8 comma negative 10. So negative 10 is the final value. Alright, you gotta look at the functions for this. Alrighty, 12b, now we have two functions and we're gonna do different operations with them and have some composition going. Okay, so for part A, it's saying find f of g of x. Okay, if it's written like this, you write this as f of g of x. So basically plug in g of x into f. So g of x is 6x minus 1. Plug it into f. Okay, so plug it into this function. So this function says whatever gets plugged in, square it, multiply by 3, subtract 7. Okay, so all I have to do is solve it out. Okay, here again, this is FOIL. I need to multiply 6x minus 1 by 6x minus 1. So do your first, outer, inner, and last. And this is what you would get when you join like terms, right? But remember that there's a 3 in front. So the 3 has to be distributed, and then I can subtract 7, okay? So this is gonna be 36 times 3, 108. That's 108x squared. 3 times negative 12 is negative 36x, and 3 times 1 is 3, right? Now I have what I need. I can subtract 7 from the 3, because those are both just regular numbers. And of course, 3 minus 7 is negative 4, right? So this would be your answer for part A, f of g of x. Okay, now we're interested in the other direction. First, we're going to plug in f of x. You can pause the video and go back to if you need it to have it for more time. Okay, so now we're going to do g of f of x, right? So you can rewrite this. So this means plug in f of x into g, okay? Well, f of x is 3x squared minus 7, right? So that means I'm going to be plugging that into g of x. So instead of this, I'm going to be plugging into here. So this is telling me whatever gets plugged into the g function gets multiplied by 6 and then subtracted by 1. Multiply it by 6, then subtract by 1, right? So this is distribution. This is 18x squared minus 42 minus 1. Okay? And of course, negative 42 minus 1 is negative 43. So my final answer would be 18x squared minus 43. Okay? Probably should have erased those. Now it's saying part C and D. C is f plus g of x, so we're going to be adding our functions. And for the bottom one, it's f asterisk g of x, which is multiplication. Alright, so over here, you're just gonna add them. Okay, if I were to subtract, I would be very careful with my signs and make sure I subtract both g terms. Okay, here it's just adding them. Do I have any like terms? Well, only my numbers. What's negative 7 minus 1? Negative 8. So now I have my answer is a quadratic function. Okay, that's part C. For part D, I'm going to multiply them. So I'm going to multiply my f function with my g function. So what do you need to use when you multiply two terms by two terms? That's right, FOIL. Right? This is to make sure I distribute everything correctly. So this 3x squared wants to be distributed to each term, and then the negative 7 wants to be distributed. So you notice that's first, outer, inner, and last. Okay, you could check it, but I'm gonna put the final answer. So it's gonna be 18x to the third power, because it's x squared times x. Okay, then it's gonna be minus 3x squared minus 42x plus 7. And here I see that I can't add any like terms because here I have x cubed, x squared, x, and then a number. Okay, so that is my final answer. As long as I multiply correctly with the correct signs. Okay, last few questions. We have another one. Okay, for part 12C, I'll give you the answer and you can check. Question? Okay, so for part 12C, we have when you plug in, you get x. So I'm gonna have you guys do that by yourself. And then 13 and 14, we have inverse functions. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and pause and make another video.